Miranda from Pontes Books, here with the Chapter 18 fun fact. For The Prince and the Pauper, there actually wasn't a historical tidbit I could come up with for Chapter 18. So instead, we're going to skip that and do a fun fact and current event. I tried, but there really wasn't anything that I thought was a good historical tidbit. So fun fact it is. So today's fun fact comes from toward the end of chapter 18, where we see Edward in a barn, kind of trying to fall asleep, and he experiences some fear. So today's fun fact is fear of the dark. We're exploring, why are people afraid of the dark? So first, just looking back at that scene that I referenced earlier. So here's a quote from part of that section. Then, just as he was on the point of losing himself wholly, he distinctly felt something touch him. He was broad awake in a moment and gasping for breath. The cold horror of that mysterious touch in the dark almost made his heart stand still. So this part kind of goes on for a little while, this fear that Edward is having, but I figured this was a good spot that kind of encompasses how terrified he was and the fact that it was because there was this touch in the dark. It's the dark that scared him, and it ended up being a calf. He found out later on, but it took him a good amount of time to find the bravery to be able to actually explore it and figure out what it was that had brushed up against him, and actually has to brush up against him twice before he actually reaches out and tries to figure out what it is. So what is the fear of the dark? I guess I'm not exactly sure if it's nyctophobia or nyctophobia, but that is the extreme fear of the night or darkness. So a phobia is an extreme version of a fear where basically it interferes with your life and you're not able to, kind of get beyond that. So fears and phobias, phobia is a more extreme fear. And because of that extreme fear of night or darkness, it can cause intense symptoms of anxiety and depression in people. And we'll get to some more physical and emotional symptoms in just a little bit here that can be caused by this fear of the dark. So oftentimes this fear starts in childhood, but this is a pretty normal part of development. And it is something that people typically grow out of. But in my opinion, I think there's always some things that linger there, just a little bit, of fear that comes with it. And we'll talk a little more about that too. But essentially, a lot of children do have that fear of the dark, along with, some other typical childhood fears like ghosts and monsters and things like that. So often humans fear the dark because of its lack of visual stimuli. You can't see what's going on around you. So really it's the fear of the unknown as opposed to the fear of the dark that most people are feeling. It's because they can't see what's around them. It's not the dark itself. It's the what's out there feeling that people are scared by. So some people have said that there's actually an evolutionary explanation to this. So some researchers hypothesize that this is an innate fear. It's something that is just already worked into our, I guess, brain, that we react this way to the dark because, back in time, our ancestors were often on the lookout for predators, because back when humans weren't really, top dog and they were maybe being hunted by other species and other animals, they would have to be on the lookout for being hunted. So many of these hunters hunted at night, and that made humans especially vulnerable, or our ancestors especially vulnerable, because of our poor eyesight. We're not ideal, night explorers. We're more of daytime folk. And so that made them more vulnerable. So that was important that they would stay, in a safe spot when it was dark so that they could avoid being hunted, essentially. And so they said now modern day that fear is not so much an extreme anxiety in most cases. It's more of just a feeling of foreboding, just something about it that keeps you from going out into the darkness because you feel like there might be something unsafe out there. And as I mentioned before, it really is just essentially a fear of the unknown. You don't know what sort of predator is out there or bad thing is out there because you can't see it. So some physical symptoms that go along with fear of sleep, or sorry, not fear of sleep, fear of the dark would be, and these are in some of those more extreme cases. So these are the physical symptoms: trouble breathing, racing heart rate, chest tightness or pain, shaking, trembling, or tingling sensations, lightheadedness or dizziness, upset stomach, hot or cold flashes, and sweating. And then in addition to those physical symptoms, there are some emotional symptoms as well that could go along with a phobia of the dark. So it could be an overwhelming feeling of anxiety or panic, an intense need to escape the situation, detachment from self or feeling unreal, losing control or feeling crazy, feeling like you may die or lose consciousness, and feeling powerless over your fear. So a lot of those could apply to other phobias as well, but in the case of fear of the dark, they could apply also. So what are some treatments that people who have a fear of the dark might try? So one would obviously be leaving a dark bedroom and sleeping in a lit room. So when we think about those childhood examples, right, a lot of parents will leave a light on or they'll get a night light, and that helps to appease that. And again, when they're younger children, oftentimes they grow out of it. But if someone has an extreme fear of the dark as an adult, this is fixing the problem, but not really getting at the root of it. Unless they're going to be able to sleep in a lit room for the rest of their life and they're never going to have to deal with being in darkness ever, this is probably something that they want to deal with more than just kind of leave the situation. So these are some other common treatments for phobias. So one is exposure therapy. So you expose yourself to the dark repeatedly until it no longer causes feelings of panic. Then there's cognitive therapy, helps replace the feelings of anxiety that come with being afraid of the dark with more positive or realistic thoughts. There's relaxation treatment, which has to do with deep breathing and exercise. And then in some cases, medication is appropriate, and others it's not, but that's another possible treatment that people sometimes have. Now, in the case specifically of the dark, a lot of the medication that might go along with it might be like a sleeping medication, and those you run the risk of easily becoming dependent or addicted to those, and so those are a little risky when it comes to something like this. But those are some possible ways that people deal with some of those phobias, including a phobia of the dark. So that's all we have for today. Hopefully you learned something. Have a good rest of your day.